He took a beating so bad his ribs cracked, on purpose, so his little brother could slip through the fence and run. And as Noah ran, he could hear Eli screaming behind him. He kept running because that's what Eli was fighting for. For 4 years, Noah believed his brother was dead. For 4 years, Eli believed the same about Noah. And somewhere in a mine shaft in the Colorado mountains, a 13-year-old boy was keeping a 6-year-old girl alive, waiting for someone, anyone, to come. Nobody ever did. Until a man with a bad leg and a 7-year-old daughter made a promise he had no idea how to keep. The people who hold others together during the worst of times are usually the ones nobody is holding. See them. Show up for them. Be the one who finally comes. This channel lives in the deep heart of the West, in the love between brothers, in the courage of fathers, in the children who survive the unsurvivable, and teach the rest of us what it means to hope. Subscribe. Like this. Share it. And tell me your country in the comments. I want to know how far Eli and Noah's story travels. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. Thank you for being part of our community.
Caleb grabbed Rosie. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low. He pushed through the crowd, that old war wound in his legs, screaming with every step. $15, the man shouted. A rancher in the back called out. 20, the man smiled. 20 it is. Do I hear 25? The boy on the crate just stared off into nothing, a look Caleb had seen on dying men in the war. 30, Caleb said, his voice cutting through the chatter. The crowd went quiet. The man with the scar on his face turned. "I am not buying him," Caleb said, plain and clear. "I am telling you to take that rope off him before I do it for you." The man chuckled. "This boy is my legal ward. I have papers from a judge in Denver. I can do what I please." Caleb shook his head. "Guardians do not sell children like livestock." Before Caleb could say another word, little Rosie slipped past him. She walked right up to the crate and held out the peppermint stick she had been saving all week. "Here," she said. "It is real good." For the first time, a flicker of life showed in the boy's eyes. His raw, trembling hand reached out and took the candy. "He is cold, Daddy," Rosie said, looking back at Caleb. Then she turned to the scarred man. "And you are mean. He is scared of you." The man's smile vanished. "You had better teach your girl some manners, Mackenzie." He tightened his grip on the rope. "Now step aside. I have business here." "Your business in this town is over," Caleb replied, his hand resting on his pistol. The man, Slade, just laughed. "You would shoot me over some stray in front of your daughter?" Caleb's voice was cold. "I am asking you one last time. Take off the rope." Slade looked Caleb up and down, seeing the worn holster and the look in his eye that meant business. He finally let the rope drop. The boy stumbled, and Caleb caught him. The child felt like a bundle of sticks. "I will be back for what is mine, Mackenzie," Slade snarled. Then he and his men rode out of town. Up close, Caleb saw the boy was covered in bruises, old and new. "Daddy, can we take him home?" Rosie asked. Caleb knew it meant trouble, but he looked at the boy and then his daughter. "Let us get inside before we all freeze," he said, wrapping his own coat around the child. Their neighbor, Clara Jennings, already had the door open. "Caleb Thornton," she said, pulling them in. "I cannot decide if you are the bravest man I know or the biggest fool." She pointed to the stove. "Sit him down, Rosie. Go get the wool blankets." Caleb tried to ask the boy his name, but the child just stared at the floor, shaking. "That Maury Slade is coming back," Caleb said. Clara turned from the stove, her face grim. "That man is bad news. Folks whisper about his mine. They say children go to work there, but they never come out." She looked at Rosie, wrapping the boy in a blanket. "You have a daughter to think about, Caleb." He nodded. "I am thinking of her. What am I teaching her if I let a man sell a child in the street and I do nothing? Clara had no answer for that. The boy just kept trembling, not from the cold, but from a fear that ran bone deep. Rosie sat next to him. I am Rosie. We have a dog named Biscuit. Do you like dogs? The boy's voice was a tiny whisper. Never met one. Rosie's eyes went wide. Never met a dog? Oh, we have to fix that. Biscuit will love you. For the first time, something changed in the boy's face. It was not a smile, but it was a start. Clara brought him a cup of hot broth. He took a sip and his eyes closed. For a brief moment, all the pain and emptiness was replaced with simple, raw gratitude. Caleb asked him one more time, his voice gentle. Son, what is your name? Caleb watched the boy's eyes dart from Rosie to Clara. Noah was doing the hard math that every hurt child knows, figuring the odds, wondering if this kindness was real, and what it would end up costing him. In a voice barely a whisper, he said, Noah Ward. That man, Mr. Slade, he's going to come looking for me. He always does. He has legal papers saying I belong to him. Nobody owns you, son. A judge says otherwise. Well, then that judge is a fool. Noah just shook his head. You do not understand. He has 22 other children up there. If you make him mad, he will take it out on them. On my... He swallowed the word, his eyes hitting the floor. He hurts the others. Caleb heard it plain as day, the word Noah almost said. Someone he was still protecting, even now. Who is still there, Noah? The boy's jaw set like stone. I cannot tell you. If he finds out I told, he will hurt them worse. All right, Caleb said, holding up his hands. You do not have to say a thing. Clara caught his gaze and gave a slight shake of her head. Do not push him. Let him be. The door swung open, and in walked Dr. Agnes Whitfield, all silver hair and sharp eyes. She took one look at Noah, and her mouth set into a grim, thin line. Clara sent a boy to fetch me 5 minutes ago. She put her bag on the table. Let me have a look at him. Be gentle, Doc. The boy is terrified. Caleb, I have been gentle with scared children since before you were born. Do not tell me how to do my job. Agnes pulled a chair near Noah but did not touch him. She just sat with her hands in plain sight. I am Dr. Whitfield. I am just going to see where you are hurt. You tell me to stop, and I will stop. You understand? Noah gave a tiny nod. The checkup took 15 minutes. Agnes was careful, but her face grew stormier with every mark she found. When she was done, she helped Noah with his shirt, then pulled Caleb outside onto the porch. How bad is it? Her voice was pure ice. 3 ribs were broken and healed all wrong. Old rope burns on his wrists. I counted 37 lash marks on his back. And Caleb, someone tried to choke that boy in the last week. The handprints are still there. Can you write it all down? I have been. I will have 12 pages of proof by the time I am finished. Any decent judge will put Slade away for good. And if the judge is not decent, then we are all in trouble. Back inside, Rosie had left Clara's lap and was telling Noah all about Christmas. Do you get presents? No. Well, Daddy gets me one, and last year Clara made me a dress. This year I am asking for something else. What is that? Rosie looked at her father, then at Noah. A brother. The room fell silent. Caleb felt something crack open in his chest. You would not want me, Noah said. Mr. Slade says I am nothing but trouble. He says that is why my own folks left me. Mr. Slade is a liar, Rosie declared. My daddy says so. Your daddy does not know everything. Yes, he does. Right, Daddy? Caleb looked at his 7-year-old daughter, then at the broken boy beside her. He had sworn he would never risk his heart again, not after losing his wife, Martha, but he could almost hear her voice in his head. You do not have to be perfect, Caleb. You just have to be there. No, Caleb said softly. I do not know everything. But I know you are not trouble, Noah, and I know you are coming home with us. Noah's cup dropped to the table. What? You heard me. But what about Slade and his men? And the law? I have got a spare bed and a dog who will keep your feet warm. Caleb held out his hand. Is that enough for right now? Noah just stared at the hand. Every hand ever offered to him had been a trap. Every promise had been a lie. Rosie put her little hand right on top of her father's. We are nice people, I promise. Daddy burns the biscuits sometimes, but we are nice. I do not burn them that often, Caleb grumbled. You burned them yesterday. Clara snorted from her corner. The stove is fine. You just cannot cook. And right then the smallest thing happened. The corner of Noah's mouth twitched. It was not a smile, but it was a start. He reached out and put his small, trembling hand in Caleb's. The boy's fingers were cold as ice. All right, then, Caleb said. Let us get you home. Clara already had a bundle of warm clothes ready. This coat was from the Henderson boy. It is good wool. The boots might be a little big, but we can fix that. Noah accepted each piece like it was treasure. As Clara buttoned the coat, the boy's eyes started to water. Nobody has ever, he whispered, his voice cracking. Well, somebody is now, Clara said, straightening his collar. Agnes gave Caleb a folded paper. My first notes. This is the right thing to do, Caleb, but it is going to get ugly. It is already ugly. It is going to get a whole lot worse. They stepped out into the falling snow. Caleb lifted Rosie into the wagon, then turned to help Noah. The boy tried to climb up, but his legs gave out. Caleb caught him and lifted him onto the seat. He weighed next to nothing. Rosie tucked the blanket over both of them. Biscuit is our dog. You are going to love him. I have never had a dog. Well, you do now. Caleb took the reins and they started off. They rode in silence for a good while, the world growing white and quiet around them. Noah sat stiff as a board, watching the horizon like a hunted rabbit. Noah. Yes, sir. You can just call me Caleb. Yes, Caleb. That is better. More quiet. Then, his voice was so low Caleb could barely hear it over the wind. That man Slade, he is going to come for me. I know. He will bring men with him. I know that too. He has got papers signed by a judge. You cannot fight the law. Just watch me. Noah's hands twisted the blanket. Then he said, I have a brother. Caleb's hands tightened on the leather reins. Tell me. His name is Eli. He is 13. He is still at the mine. We will get him out. You cannot promise that. I just did. I've failed good people before by not standing tall when I should have. I swore on their memory that I would never fail again. We are going to get your brother back. You have my word. Noah stared right into Caleb's eyes, looking for the catch, for the lie he'd come to expect from folks. He found nothing. The boy turned his gaze back to the snowy path ahead. His small hand slid across the seat until it found Rosie's. She took it, weaving her fingers into his like it was the most natural thing in the world. The three of them rode on, their fates tied together by a choice made in an instant. Behind them, the town of Burden Creek vanished. Up ahead, the ranch was waiting. And somewhere deep in those mountains, a 13-year-old boy named Eli was still drawing breath in a dark mine. Caleb wasn't sure he could keep his promise. He didn't know if the law would be a help or a hindrance. But his daughter was holding a stranger's hand like he was kin. And a boy who had given up on hope had just trusted him with a name. That was more than enough to start. The ranch appeared as the last bit of daylight faded from the sky. Caleb stopped the wagon and helped Rosie down. She took off running toward the cabin, yelling for Biscuit. Her voice rang out clear in the cold. The old hound dog came lumbering out, slow and fat with droopy ears, his tail wagging steady. He aimed for Rosie, then stopped short, catching a new smell. He planted himself before the wagon and looked up at Noah with the serious face of a dog on official business. Noah just sat there staring at the cabin and the barn. He watched the smoke curl from the chimney like a man who'd found a river after dying of thirst and couldn't believe it was real. Rosie called out, "That's just Biscuit. He will not bite you. He barely has enough teeth left." He has plenty of teeth, Caleb said. He just saves them for pine cones. Come on down, son, before we all turn to ice. When Noah's feet hit the ground, his legs gave out, and Caleb caught him. Biscuit padded over and pushed his wet nose right into Noah's hand. The boy flinched, then went still. His fingers slowly uncurled and touched the dog's head. When Biscuit licked his wrist, Noah snatched his hand back. He licked me. That just means he likes you, Rosie said. Why? Because you are a good person. Come on, I will show you the house. She took his hand and led him toward the cabin door. Caleb watched them go. Rosie, half the boy's size, but with all the confidence in the world, pulling that lost soul into her life. When he finally came inside, the cabin was warm and cozy. Rosie had stoked the fire, a skill he'd taught her last winter. She sat on the floor, talking to Noah while he stood in the middle of the room, just looking around. That is my daddy's chair, and that is mine. You can use Mama's chair. She is in heaven, so she does not need it. Noah stopped his slow turning. My mama died when I was born. My daddy says she was the best person he ever knew. My mama died too. It was a fever. I was only 5. Rosie nodded, her face all serious, like they were now part of the same sad club. Does it still hurt? I do not remember her well enough for it to hurt. I think that is worse. Yeah, Rosie scratched the dog's ear. I do not remember mine either, but Daddy tells me stories about her. He says she had a real loud laugh and was a terrible cook. I heard that, Caleb said from the doorway. Your mama was a wonderful cook, but Clara says she burned everything. Well, Clara talks too much. Caleb moved to the stove. Noah, are you hungry? The boy looked at him instantly on guard. I do not need much. I can eat whatever is left. I do not have to eat at all. That was just broth you had earlier. That is not a real meal. Caleb grabbed a skillet. I am making bacon and eggs, and you are eating with us. That is not a request. Yes, sir. What did I tell you about calling me sir? I am sorry. Yes, Caleb, that is much better. Rosie set out 3 plates at the table. We have never had 3 before. The words hung in the quiet room. Caleb cracked eggs into the pan, his back to them. His throat felt too tight to speak. They all ate together. Noah sat in Martha's chair, which felt both right and terribly wrong. The boy ate, just like before, slow and careful, as if he was saving up energy for a long journey. You do not have to eat like that, Rosie told him. There is always more food here. My daddy has chickens. They give us eggs every single day. Noah looked over at Caleb. Every day. Every single day. Something in the boy's expression changed, like he was hearing about a world he had long forgotten. Caleb put his fork down. Noah, I'm not going to push you for answers tonight. You are hurt and you are tired. But I need you to understand something. Whenever you are ready to tell me what happened, I will believe you, and I promise I will help you. Noah stopped eating and just looked at Caleb for a long moment. He gave a single nod and then went back to his plate. After dinner, Rosie showed Noah where he'd sleep in the loft. Caleb could hear her little footsteps overhead. If you get scared in the night, just call for my daddy. He always comes. I do not get scared. Everybody gets scared. Even my daddy gets scared. No, he does not. He does. He is just good at not showing it. That is what brave means. Being scared, but doing what you have to do anyway. There was a pause, then Noah's quiet voice. I am scared all the time. That is okay. You are the bravest person I have ever met. Downstairs, Caleb sat at the table and rubbed his tired eyes. His 7-year-old daughter understood things it had taken him 38 years to figure out. He checked the rifle over the door. It was loaded. He checked the revolver on the table. It was loaded too. He checked all the locks and shutters. Then he sat in the dark with a glass of whiskey, listening to the sound of children sleeping. Slade would be coming. Probably not tonight. A man like that didn't run on anger. He ran on cold calculation, which made him far more dangerous. Caleb knew he needed help. He needed a lawyer and a marshal. He needed to get witness statements from Agnes and the Reverend Calloway. He needed every bit of help he could get, and he needed it fast. He finished his drink, checked the locks one last time, and climbed the ladder. Noah was curled up in the corner, just as Caleb had seen him by the water trough, with his eyes wide open and watching. Sleep is not coming easy. I never do sleep much. Mind if I join you? Noah gave a small shrug. Caleb eased himself to the floor, his old leg groaning in protest. Rosie was asleep 3 feet away, looking like a starfish with a biscuit near her foot. Noah asked, "Does she always sleep like that?" Caleb almost smiled. "Since she was a baby. Takes up the entire bed." The ghost of a smile vanished. "What if Slade comes back with the sheriff? Then we will handle the sheriff. What if the law is on his side? Then we will find a higher law. What if everyone is on his side?" Caleb looked straight at the boy. "Then it is just us, and that will be enough." "How can you say that?" "You do not know him. Tell me then." Noah fell silent, his fingers picking at the blanket. It was a nervous habit, something to soothe himself when the bad memories got too close. "Not tonight," Noah whispered. "I cannot do it tonight. Do it." "All right, not tonight. But my brother Eli, he is why I got away. He picked a fight with the meanest guard. He took a terrible beating so I could get through the fence. Heard them breaking his bones. I heard him yelling and I just ran." Caleb felt a tightness in his chest. "You did what he wanted. I left him there. You lived. That is what he was fighting for. What if he is dead? What if he is alive, just waiting for someone to come get him?" Noah's breath caught in his throat. "He is tough, much tougher than me. He once spent 3 days in the hole and came out singing just to make Slade angry. Eli would never let that man see him break. That is why Slade hated him so much. He sounds like a man I would want on my side. He is the best person I know. He kept me alive for 4 years. Then we owe him a debt, and I always pay my debts." Noah stared at him in the dim light. His eyes were still guarded, but something new was there, a small crack in his armor. "Nobody ever came for us before. We waited, thinking someone would care. Nobody ever did. I care. Why? We are just kids. Nobody ever wanted. My sister Annabelle was a kid nobody wanted." The words spilled out before Caleb could stop them. He had not spoken. Noah pulled the blanket up to his chin and closed his eyes. "Caleb?" "Yeah. Thank you for everything. You should not have to thank a man for things you should have always had. I know. But no one else ever gave them to me." Caleb waited until the boy's breathing was deep and steady. He climbed back down the ladder and sat in his chair by the cold stove, not sleeping a wink. Dawn arrived gray and cold. Caleb had the fire going and coffee on before sunlight touched the windows. He was cooking bacon when he heard a horse. His hand went straight to his rifle. It was a single rider from town. He relaxed when he saw it was Reverend James Calloway's horse. The preacher was 60 years old, with white hair and a straight back from his days as a Union soldier. "Morning, James." "Morning, Caleb. I heard you had some excitement yesterday. News sure travels fast in this town. Clara sent her boy over before the sun went down." Calloway tied his horse and came inside. "Where is the boy?" "He is sleeping. Probably the first real sleep he has had in years." Calloway took a cup of coffee and sat. His eyes were serious, the eyes of a man who had seen the worst of the war and somehow still held on to his faith. "Caleb, do you understand what you have done?" "I do. Slade has friends in Denver. Judge Harlan is the one who signed those papers. If Slade takes this to court, you could lose everything. He was selling the boy in the street, James. He had a rope around his waist and was calling out prices." The Reverend's cup stopped in midair, like a horse at an auction. 30 people just stood there and watched it happen. The Reverend put his cup down. Who saw this? Half the town. And would they testify against a man with money and guns? Some might if their pastor asked them the right way. I will speak with every last one of them. And I will write to Federal Marshal Wade Prescott in Denver. I served with his father. He will listen. What about Judge Harlan? He is a politician. He goes whichever way the wind is blowing. If we make enough noise, the wind just might blow our way. Footsteps creaked on the ladder. Noah climbed down, his hair a mess from sleep. He saw the Reverend and froze. "It is all right," Caleb said. "This is Reverend Calloway. He is a friend." Calloway nodded from his chair. "Morning, Noah. I hear you are staying here for a while." Noah glanced at Caleb, who nodded back. The boy moved cautiously to the table. "Are you a real preacher?" Noah asked. "For 30 years. We had a preacher visit the mine once. Mr. Slade brought him. The man told us we were blessed and that hard work built character." Calloway's face turned to stone. "That man was a liar using God's name." "How do I know you are any different?" "You do not yet. But I will prove it to you. Just like Caleb is proving it. One day at a time." Noah seemed to think about that. He reached for a piece of bacon. Caleb saw the boy's hands were not shaking as badly. Rosie came down the ladder like a small storm, and the cabin was suddenly full of life. She hugged Caleb and sat right next to Noah as if he belonged there. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in a long time. I told you the loft was warm." "Did Biscuit snore?" "He snores really loud." "I did not hear a thing." "Then you really slept well because Biscuit snores louder than Daddy." "I do not snore," Caleb said. "You do, Daddy." The walls shake. Calloway hid a smile in his coffee cup. Noah watched them all like he was learning a new language made of warmth and teasing. Later, Calloway pulled Caleb aside on the porch. "I will ride to Denver myself, but you need to be ready. Slade will not wait for the law." "I know." "The boy, he is holding something back." I saw it in his eyes. "His brother Eli is still at that mine. There is more to it. Something he is not ready to talk about yet. Be ready when he is. Whatever it is big." Caleb watched the Reverend ride away. Through the window, he saw Rosie teaching Noah how to play checkers with bottle caps. The boy was focused, learning something much more important than a game. Agnes showed up around noon. She walked right in and put a sealed envelope on the table. "My full report. I documented everything. 37 lash marks, 3 broken ribs, rope burns, burns on his feet, and bruises from being strangled. It is the worst case of child abuse I have seen in 15 years. Will it be enough for court? It will be enough for any judge with a soul. What if the judge is blind? Then I will make him see." Agnes looked over at Noah and Rosie. "Caleb, that boy carries more than just scars you can see. He flinches at loud noises and never turns his back to a door. He eats like he will never see food again. He needs time and patience. He will get all of that here. And when Slade comes, he will get something entirely different." "Martha always said you were the most stubborn man in all of Colorado. Second most. She was always first." Agnes almost cracked a smile. "I will be back in a couple of days to check on his ribs. Make sure he eats small meals. His stomach needs to get used to real food again." After she left, Caleb put her medical report in a lockbox beneath the floorboards. $83, the deed to the ranch, and now 12 pages that could either save a boy or start a war. The day was peaceful. Noah did his chores without being told, moving with a quiet skill that showed he'd learned how to be useful to avoid trouble. He fed the chickens, then just stood there watching them. "Have you been around chickens before?" Caleb asked. "No. They are funny. They do not know they are funny, and that is what makes them so funny." The corner of Noah's mouth twitched. It was almost a smile, getting a little closer each time. Later, Rosie took Noah to the barn to meet the horses. Caleb watched from the corral fence as his daughter introduced each animal. "This one is Copper. He is my daddy's horse, and he is old and grumpy. This is Penny. She is my horse, but I am still too small for her. And this one is Ghost. She is all white. She don't take kindly to strangers, but she'll like you." Noah reached out his hand to Ghost the same way he had with Biscuit. Be ready to pull back, he thought. The mare sniffed his fingers, then blew a puff of warm air right into his palm. Rosie's face lit up. She likes you. See, animals always know if a person is good. Noah gently stroked Ghost's nose. His own hand was perfectly steady. Not a single shake. The warmth from the horse, the simple trust of an animal who only understands kindness or cruelty, touched a part of the boy that words had not yet reached. Without turning, Noah spoke. "Caleb, there is something I did not tell you." Caleb felt his stomach tighten but kept his voice calm. "Go on." He spoke about the children at the mine, some as young as 6 or 7. They used them for the tightest tunnels, the places where even I can't crawl. Noah's hand kept petting the horse's nose, his voice flat and empty. "There is a girl named Sadie. She is 7, just like Rosie. My brother Eli watches over her now, the way he used to watch over me." Noah's hand stopped. "If Slade finds out I told you, he will not punish me. He will punish them. That is how he makes sure we stay quiet. He goes after the people you care about." The only sound in the corral was the soft breathing of the horses. "Noah," Caleb said, "look at me." The boy turned, his eyes bone dry, lost in a place beyond tears. "We are going to get them out. Eli, Sadie, every single one of those children. This is not a wish. This is a plan. You are just one man with a bad leg and a rifle." "I am one man with a bad leg and a rifle," Caleb corrected. "And a whole town of folks who are about to get mighty angry when they hear what you just told me." Noah stared at him, weighing the odds the same way he always did. Finally, he nodded. "Okay." That night, with the children asleep in the loft, Caleb sat with a pen and paper. He wrote 3 different letters. The first went to Marshal Prescott to back up what the man from the train would say. The second was for a lawyer in Denver named Samuel Graves. And the third went to Clara Jennings, asking her to talk to every single person in Burden Creek who stood by and did nothing. He sealed the envelopes and put them by the door. Tomorrow, the fight would truly begin. He checked the locks and his rifle, then poured a whiskey he had no intention of drinking. That is when he heard it, a soft sound from the loft above. Someone was crying, and it was not Rosie, it was Noah. The boy was crying in his sleep, making small, broken noises that he tried to swallow even in his dreams. Even asleep, he was hiding his pain. Caleb climbed the ladder. Noah was curled into a tight ball, his arms wrapped around his knees. Rosie was awake next to him, her hand on his back, rubbing little circles, just like Caleb did for her when she had a bad dream. "He keeps saying a name," Rosie whispered. "He keeps saying Eli." Caleb sat on Noah's other side and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. The crying softened, and the whimpering stopped. Noah's small body slowly uncurled as his breathing grew deeper. "Daddy," Rosie whispered. "I know, baby. We have to get his brother. You will. Promise. I promise." "Good," she said, lying back down but keeping her hand on Noah's back. "He cries every night, Daddy. He tries not to make a sound, but I hear him. I think the only thing that will make him stop is if Eli comes home." Caleb sat there in the dark between his daughter and the boy who was becoming his son, feeling the weight of the promise he had made. It felt as heavy as the Colorado snow on the roof. Somewhere up in those mountains, in a dark mine where children toiled, Eli Ward was waiting. Caleb knew he had to get to him in time. 3 days later, Slade made his move. Caleb was splitting firewood when he heard them. It was not the sound of horses this time, but the heavy wheels of a wagon. He put down the axe and picked up the rifle, leaning against the woodpile. "Noah, Rosie, get inside." Noah, who was drawing water from the well, dropped the bucket and grabbed Rosie's hand. They vanished into the cabin without a single word. Noah had spent his life running from danger. He knew its sound all too well. Caleb walked to the front of the cabin as 2 wagons pulled up. The first carried 3 men. Slade sat in the middle, his face pale in the winter light. On his left was Virgil Hobbs, tall and skinny with a rifle. On his right was Dutch Perry, fat and red-faced with a pistol on each hip. The second wagon held a man Caleb did not know. He was a small man in a suit that looked silly on a dirt road in December. He clutched a leather case on his lap and looked terrified. Slade climbed down from the wagon slowly. "Morning, Mackenzie. Get off my land. That is no way to greet a man who came to handle things peacefully." Slade motioned to the man in the suit. "This is Mr. Leland Cross, an attorney. He has papers from a judge in Denver. It is a legal custody order. You can read it for yourself." The lawyer stepped down and walked toward Caleb, his hands shaking. "Mr. Mackenzie, I have a court order that says you must turn over the child, Noah Ward, to his legal guardian, Mr. Morai Slade. If you do not, that is kidnapping under Colorado law, and you will be punished by— I know what it is punishable by. Then you must understand I am required to— I understand you are standing on my property with a man who beats children. I understand you drove 40 miles in the freezing cold to take a 9-year-old boy back to a mine where he has been abused for 4 years. I understand all of that. And all— Now you understand something." Caleb's voice grew quiet. "That boy is not leaving this ranch." Slade just smiled, his cold, empty smile. "You hear that, Mr. Cross? The man just said he is going to break the law right in front of witnesses. I do believe that is a crime, Mr. Mackenzie," the lawyer stammered, his voice thin. "We don't want any trouble. Just hand over the boy." Caleb's voice was cold as a winter morning. "You don't want trouble? Then you should not have ridden out with a man who whips a 9-year-old boy until his back is nothing but raw meat." Slade just smiled that cold smile of his. "The boy has a wild imagination. Scars happen on a working outfit." "Your business is slavery," Caleb stated plainly. "My business is legal," Slade shot back, "which is more than I can say for what you are doing here." That is when the cabin door creaked open. It was Noah. "Get back inside, son," Caleb ordered. "No." The boy's voice was quiet but steady. He walked right past Caleb to face the monster himself, his small body shaking but his chin held high. "I am not going back, Mr. Slade. I told them everything." Slade's smile turned into a sneer. "You told them lies, boy." "I told them the truth," Noah said. "And I will tell it to a judge." When Slade moved toward him, Caleb stepped in the way. Caleb stood like a rock, his rifle across his chest. "That is close enough." Slade chuckled without humor. "You are making a big mistake, Mackenzie. I have the law, and I will see you in chains by Christmas." Caleb did not even blink. "And I have a doctor's report for 37 lash marks on a boy's back. I have a reverend riding to Denver to speak with a federal marshal. And I have a town full of people who watched you try to sell a child in the street." For just a second, a crack appeared in Slade's confident mask. "No one would dare testify against me." "Are you certain?" Caleb asked. "The folks in this town saw you put a rope on a child. You think their wives will let them forget that?" One of Slade's hired guns, Virgil, started to reach for his rifle. "Tell your man to keep his hands where I can see them," Caleb said, his voice flat. "He can get comfortable with his hands on his knees, or he can get comfortable in the dirt. It is his choice." After a sharp nod from Slade, Virgil put his hands on his knees. "The correct legal course of action," the lawyer began, "is to file a counter-petition." "Already done," Caleb cut him off. The lawyer paused, confused. "Pardon me?" "I said it is already done, filed yesterday. A petition for emergency custody with medical proof and sworn testimony. I have copies right inside." It was a complete bluff. The papers were still on his table, sealed and waiting, but they did not know that. Slade studied Caleb then, seeing not just a rancher, but a man who knew how to fight. "Fine," Slade said, his voice dropping low. "We will fight in court. But understand this. I have run that mine for 6 years. People who cause me problems. They have a way of disappearing." "That is not a threat," Slade added. "That is just history. It is how things work." "Then let me tell you how this works," Caleb said, stepping forward until he was almost nose to nose with Slade. "You have 22 children in that mine. The doctor knows it, the reverend knows it, and soon a federal marshal will know it. Bring your lawyers and your guns. You are not getting this boy. Not today. Not ever. You are only one man, Slade hissed. I am one man with nothing left to lose, Caleb replied. You might want to think about how dangerous that makes me. Slade's jaw was tight. For a long, silent moment, the two men measured each other. Finally, Slade turned to his lawyer. Note that Mr. Mackenzie has refused to comply with a court order. He then looked at Noah, who had not flinched. I will see you soon, boy. Noah's voice came out strong and clear. You do not scare me anymore. A flicker of pure hate crossed Slade's face before he climbed onto the wagon. 1 week, Mackenzie, Slade yelled as his wagons pulled away. December 21st, you bring that boy or I will come and get him myself. Caleb watched until they were just specks on the horizon, then let out a long breath. Noah was still standing there, trembling as the fear finally hit him. You should not have come outside, Caleb said softly. I had to, the boy whispered. I am done hiding from him. Caleb looked at the small boy with the heart of a lion. That was brave, son. Felt like I was going to throw up. That is exactly what brave feels like. The cabin door opened and Rosie ran to hug Noah. He is coming back, Noah told her. Then we will be ready, she answered. Noah looked at Caleb. 1 week is not a lot of time. Then we cannot afford to waste a single minute, Caleb said, already making a plan. He rode to town that afternoon, leaving the children with a rifle and a prayer. In town, he sent 2 telegraph messages, one to the Reverend and one to a lawyer Agnes recommended. The telegraph operator's eyes were wide. You are really going after Mariah Slade? That is the plan, Caleb said. He has friends in high places. So do I, Caleb replied. He went to see Clara next. She was on her porch, waiting as if she knew he was coming. He was here this morning, Caleb told her. I heard, she said. What do you need? Witnesses, he said. Everyone who was at the market and saw what he did. I need them to stop being silent. They are afraid, Caleb. They should be more afraid of what happens if we let him continue. Clara, there is a 7-year-old girl in that mine, same age as Rosie. Clara's face turned to stone. What did you say? Her name is Sadie. She works the small tunnels the bigger kids cannot fit in. Clara gripped the railing until her knuckles were white. I will get your witnesses, she said, her voice like ice. Every last one. And God help anyone who says no. She opened the door and let him in, then poured coffee that tasted like straight-up turpentine. Agnes didn't waste time. She'd heard about Slade's visit to the ranch. I need you in Denver, Caleb, in front of Judge Harland. He asked when. December 21st, she said. I will be there. Then Agnes leaned in. I have been looking into Slade's mine. For 6 years, it has been swallowing up children. They go in, but not one has ever been seen coming out. They are either still trapped in there, or they are buried on that mountain. I aim to see the place for myself, find their graves and document them. Medical proof of how they died, along with proof of abuse, would tear Slade's guardianship papers to shreds. You would have to get me past his guards, she finished. Caleb just stared at the 55-year-old woman, ready to ride into a hawk's nest in the dead of winter. Martha would have liked you, he said. She did, Agnes replied, setting her cup down. We had tea every Thursday till the consumption took her. We women carry the parts of the story y'all can't. He rode for home under a black sky. The biting cold cut right through his coat and his bad leg ached with every move of the horse. His mind, though, was sharp, laying out a plan for the days leading up to the hearing. He was about a mile out when he saw it, an ugly orange glow where it shouldn't be. Not the cabin, thank God. It was the barn. Flames were climbing the north wall, black smoke boiling into the freezing night. Caleb spurred his horse hard, driving it into a gallop over the snow. He could hear the awful screams of the horses trapped inside. Then he heard Rosie's terrified voice calling his name. He was off his horse before the animal even stopped running. Daddy, the barn's on fire, Rosie cried from the cabin door. Noah went in there to get the horses. Caleb's heart just about stopped cold. He is inside? I tried to stop him, Daddy. He said he had to save them. Caleb didn't wait to hear another word. He ran. The wall of heat hit him 20 feet from the door. He could hear Noah coughing inside, hear the horses panicking. He yanked his bandana over his face and charged on in. The smoke was so thick he couldn't see a thing. He could only hear Copper screaming in his stall and Penny kicking at the walls. And then he heard Noah's voice, rough and desperate. "Come on, girl, please move." Caleb followed the sound and found the boy in Ghost's stall, pulling on the big mare's halter with all his might. The horse was wild-eyed and refused to budge. "Noah, get out of here. I got this," Caleb yelled. "She won't move," the boy choked out. "I said get out. I'm not leaving her." There was no time to argue. Caleb grabbed the halter and pulled with everything he had, his legs screaming in protest. A beam overhead cracked and Noah threw himself over the horse's neck to shield her. "Move, girl, please." And just like that, the horse moved. Maybe it was Caleb's strength, or maybe it was the boy's plea, but she lunged forward just as the beam crashed down. They stumbled out into the cold air, Noah still clinging to the halter. Copper and Penny were already safe. Rosie, all of 7 years old, had run in and opened their stalls. She was Martha's daughter, all right. "Yeah," the boy's voice was raw. "The horses? They are all 3 out, thanks to you and your sister." "I know." Caleb put a hand on his son's back. "That was a foolish thing to do, Noah, running into a fire like that. You did the same thing. I am a grown man. That don't make it any less foolish," Noah shot back. Caleb nearly smiled. That's when he saw the tracks in the snow. 2 sets of boot prints leading away from the barn and down the road toward town. "Noah, I see 'em. This was no accident." "No, sir." Rosie stood with the horses, her arms wrapped around Penny's neck. "Daddy? Somebody did this," she said. "Mr. Slade." Caleb didn't have to answer. They all knew the truth. Noah got to his feet. The firelight lit up his face, and what Caleb saw there was not fear. It was a pure, cold rage. The kind that grows in a child who has been hurt and starved and has finally found something worth fighting for. "He thinks this will scare us," Noah said. "He is wrong. He burned your barn. I will just build another one. What if he comes back for the cabin? Then he will find me waiting for him." Caleb looked his boy in the eye. "Noah, this is what that man does. He finds what you care about, and he destroys it until you have nothing left, until you break. That is his game. And it has worked on everybody else before. It is not going to work on me." "How do you know that?" "Because I have already lost everything once before. My wife, my sister, my friend. I have been to the bottom, son. There is nothing left for a man like him to take. And I'm still standing right here. Slade can burn everything I own and take every last dollar, but he cannot make me quit." Noah stared at him, and that rage on his face began to share space with something that looked a lot like hope. "Caleb, yeah. There is something I need to tell you about the mine, something I never told nobody. I am listening. There is a deep tunnel, shaft 7. That is where Slade keeps his books, ledgers with the names of every child, the dates, and what happened to them." Noah's voice dropped to a whisper. "And where he buried the ones that died." Caleb stood there, frozen solid. "You are sure? I have seen him with my own eyes. Eli showed me. It was a downright crime what he found in those ledgers. Names and dates stretching back 6 long years. Dozens of children, just like Noah. If they could get their hands on those books, no judge, not even one in Harlan's pocket, could look away." The 3 of them stood there in the firelight. Folks who should have been broken, but were anything but. Rosie, a little girl with her mama's grit, took her daddy's hand and then Noah's. She looked up at Caleb and asked, "Daddy, we're going to that mine, aren't we?" He looked at his 7-year-old daughter and saw her mother's steel spine. "Yes, ma'am," he said, "we sure are." Before the sun was even a whisper, Caleb was ready. He kissed Rosie's forehead and made sure Clara, who had shown up with a shotgun and biscuits, was ready to use one before the other. "You come back, Caleb Thornton," she said. "I plan on it. he answered, riding out into the biting cold. Marshal Wade Prescott was waiting for him, just like the Reverend promised. The lawman had ridden hard from Denver, bringing 4 deputies with him. 5 men wearing badges, ready to bring the law to a lawless place. "Mackenzie," Prescott said, shaking Caleb's hand. His eyes looked like they'd seen every kind of wrong. "Reverend Calloway is a persuasive man. That doctor's report on the boy was the most awful thing I've read in 20 years. If Slade's done half of what that boy says, then he's a ghost who just doesn't know it yet." Prescott pulled a paper from his coat. "This here's a federal warrant. It's from Judge Crawford in Denver, not Harlan. Forced labor of children is a federal matter. Whatever Harlan says down here doesn't mean a thing." For the first time in days, Caleb felt like he could breathe again. "When do we ride?" he asked. They pushed west, 6 men against the snow. Noah had drawn them a map on the back of his sister's school paper. He'd marked every guard post, every tunnel, every path he'd ever dreamed of using to escape. "The main entrance is watched by 2 fellas, Hobbs and Perry. They're mean ones," Caleb explained. "But there's a back way they use for supplies. Noah said it's barely guarded before dawn." Prescott nodded. "So 6 of us against maybe 3 or 4 of them. I've seen worse odds." He looked at Caleb. "I heard you were at Antietam." "Saw the aftermath," Caleb corrected him. "Carried stretchers for 3 days. Saw more misery than I thought the world could hold. Until I saw that boy's back." They crested the ridge as the sun came up. Prescott motioned for them to stop. Down below, the mine was already stirring. Little shapes, children were hauling buckets and tools into the dark mouths of the tunnels. They moved like they'd forgotten any other way to live. One of the deputies cursed softly. A little girl with dark hair stumbled under a heavy load, and a taller boy behind her put a steadying hand on her back. "That's Eli," Caleb said, his voice tight. "And the little one must be Sadie." Prescott gave the orders. "Mitchell, Dalton, you take the main gate. Reeves, Garner, you circle around to the back. Mackenzie, you're with me. We're going straight for Slade's tent." They moved like shadows down the snowy ridge. At the main entrance, the guard was just a kid himself. He saw the federal badges and dropped his rifle without a word. The other guard made a run for it, but didn't get far. Prescott pulled back the flap to Slade's tent and went in, pistol ready. Caleb was right behind him. Slade was sitting on his cot, pulling on his boots. He looked up, and his face went from surprise to calculation in a heartbeat. "Morai Slade," Prescott said in a voice that left no room for argument. "You're under federal arrest for a list of charges as long as my arm." Slade's eyes found Caleb. "Mackenzie, I should have dealt with you proper." "You should have left that boy alone," Caleb shot back. "That boy is my legal ward," Slade sneered. Prescott stepped forward with the irons. "Judge Crawford in Denver voided every last one of your guardianship papers this morning. You don't have a legal claim to a single soul on this land." And right then the mask on Slade's face cracked clean in 2. Underneath all that pretense was nothing but pure, ugly rage. The children had stopped their work, huddled together and watching with wide, scared eyes. Caleb walked toward them, his heart in his throat. He found the tall boy, Eli, who still had one arm wrapped protectively around his little sister. "Eli," Caleb said gently. The boy flinched. "My name is Caleb Thornan. Your brother Noah is safe. He's at my ranch, and he sent me to bring y'all home." "You're lying," Eli whispered, his voice hoarse. "Noah's gone." "Slade is the one who's gone, son. He's in cuffs," Caleb said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small shape wrapped in cloth. He unfolded it and held it out. It was a little wooden horse, crudely carved but made with love, small enough to fit in a boy's pocket. A small wooden horse, the kind of thing a boy might carve with a stolen knife in the dark. Eli's tough face just crumbled. "Where did you get this?" "Noah said you carved it for him," Caleb said softly. "He said you told him it was a magic horse that would carry him away from here one day." Eli's hand trembled as he took the little horse. He turned it over and over, and 4 long years of holding himself together finally broke apart. His knees gave out, but Caleb caught him before he hit the ground. He is alive. Eli's voice was just a boy's now, not a hardened protector. Just a 13-year-old kid who thought his brother was dead. He is really alive. He is alive, Caleb confirmed. And he is safe. He has eaten 3 meals a day and sleeping in a warm bed. My daughter taught him how to play checkers. Eli just sobbed. A little girl, Sadie, hugged his waist and looked up at Caleb. Are we really going away from here? Yes, sweetheart. Y'all are all leaving this place. Promise, I promise. People make promises they don't keep. I know, but I am keeping this one. Agnes showed up 2 hours later with a wagon full of medical supplies. She had 3 women from town with her, and she went to work on the children with a quiet fury. She checked every single one, writing down their injuries with a steady hand, even as her jaw was set hard. 17 children, she told Caleb afterward. The oldest is 14, the youngest is only 6. They are all malnourished and abused. Some have broken bones that never healed right. One boy has a lung infection that would have taken him in a month. And the graves. Agnes's face turned to stone. We found them, on the north slope behind the rock pile. I counted 9. Prescott's men are uncovering them now. 9 children. 9 little souls buried without a name in the cold, dark ground, forgotten by everyone. We will know their names soon enough. The ledgers will tell us. They found them, Caleb. In Shaft 7, just like Noah said. 6 years of records, names, dates, and how they died. Slade kept perfect records. To him, it was just business. Caleb had to turn and walk away. He found the boy, Eli, sitting against a shed with little Sadie asleep in his lap. His face was a mess from crying. Eli, Caleb said gently, we are going to take you and all the other children somewhere safe now. We have food and warm blankets. What about Slade? The boy asked, his voice hoarse. He's going to Denver in chains. He will get out, Eli said with a certainty that broke Caleb's heart. Men like him always get out. Not this time, son. How can you know that? Because, Caleb said, kneeling down, there is a federal marshal, a doctor, a reverend, and an entire town making sure he never harms another child. There are 9 graves behind this camp he has to answer for, and we have 6 years of his own records that prove everything. Proof does not always win, Eli mumbled. No, it does not, Caleb agreed. But it helps. And what helps more than anything is 22 brave children willing to stand up and tell the truth. Eli's jaw set in a stubborn line, a look of true grit that Caleb knew all too well. Seen in Noah. I will testify. I will tell them everything. Every child who is lost, every beating, every day spent in that hole. I will tell them until they can no longer pretend they do not know. That is what I was hoping for. The group left the mine around noon. There were 2 wagons filled with children, all bundled in blankets that Agnes and Clara had gathered. Prescott and his deputies rode alongside with Slade chained up in the back of a prison wagon. He had stopped making threats. He just sat there staring at nothing, with the blank eyes of a man who finally knew the game was over. Caleb rode next to the children's wagon. Eli was up front with Sadie on his lap. The little girl was awake now, eating a biscuit from Clara with the same slow care that Noah always used. Little bites, as if she were saving her hope. Mr. Thornton, Caleb. Just Caleb. Eli's voice was cautious. What is Noah like now? Is he different? Different how? Well, when I knew him, he never talked much. He did not trust anyone. He never smiled. I used to tell him stories at night just to help him feel safe, but I knew he was always listening for footsteps, always ready to run. He is still like that sometimes. He does not sleep right. Loud noises make him jump. He eats every meal like it might be his last one. Caleb paused for a moment. But he laughed yesterday. My daughter told a silly joke about a chicken, and he laughed. It was the first time I ever heard it. Eli closed his eyes. He used to laugh all the time. Before, Back when Mama was alive, he would laugh at anything. A bug, a funny-shaped cloud, the way our cat used to sneeze. I thought I would never hear that sound again. You will hear it. What is your daughter, Rosie, like? She is 7. She is a little bossy. She talks a mile a minute, and she thinks every animal in the world is her job to protect. She decided Noah was her brother about 30 seconds after she first saw him. Is he getting used to it? Eli was quiet for a long moment. Sadie had fallen asleep against his chest. He held her just like Noah held Rosie's hand, as if letting go would mean losing it all. Caleb. Yes. Noah told you about Sadie. He said you look after her. Her folks are gone, both of them. Slade found her outside of Pueblo about 8 months ago. She was just wandering down the road with no shoes on. Did not even know her own last name. Eli's arm tightened around the sleeping girl. The first night at the camp, Slade sent her into the narrowest tunnel. She screamed for 6 hours straight. No one could get to her. When they finally got her out, she did not say a word for 3 weeks. She is talking now. It took some time. I carried her everywhere I went, fed her and kept her near me. After a while, she started whispering to me at night. Then came single words, and then whole sentences. Eli looked down at her small face. She calls me her big brother. You are her big brother. She needs a real family, not some kid who can hardly look after himself. She has one if you want it. Eli looked up, confused. What are you saying? I am saying my ranch has a loft that is big enough for 4 kids. I am saying I have got chickens that lay eggs every morning and a dog who will sleep on your feet to keep them warm. I am saying my daughter has been asking for a bigger family since she was old enough to talk. You would take Sadie, too? I would take all of you, if that is what you want. Eli just stared at him. Caleb could see him doing the math, the same way Noah always did. Is this real? What is the price? When will the kindness run out? Why? Eli asked. You do not owe us a thing. I owe your brother everything. He reminded me what it feels like to actually care about something. I have been walking through my life asleep for 5 years, just going through the motions. I did not care about anything but seeing the sun come up one more. That day felt like a new beginning, all because Noah had been brave enough to be broken. The wagons creaked on through the snow, leaving the mine behind them. That place became a smaller and smaller scar on the mountain, a hurt that would fade with time. When they got to Burden Creek, the whole town was waiting. Folks lined the street, quiet as a prayer at first. Then one person started clapping, and soon the whole town was cheering. Caleb spotted Clara and Reverend Calloway, but he was only looking for 2 people. He saw them on Clara's porch. Noah was holding the railing tight, his eyes fixed on the wagon. Little Rosie bounced beside him. The wagon stopped. Caleb helped Eli down. The boy was shaking. Noah stumbled off the porch, walking at first, then running. He ran right through the snow with his arms wide open. The brothers crashed into each other and fell right there in the street. They just held on to each other in the snow. The sound that came out of Eli was something fierce. It was 4 years of grief and guilt and being scared, all letting go at once. It wasn't crying, and it wasn't laughing, just a sound that had no name. You're alive, Eli said over and over. I told you I would come back. Noah sobbed into his brother's coat. You did not come back. You sent someone better. Noah looked at his brother's bruised face. He hurt you. I am okay. He hurt you because of me. He hurt me because he's a monster, Eli said, holding Noah's face. Never because of you. You got out. That is all I ever wanted. Rosie walked over, tears on her cheeks. Hi, I am Rosie. I am Noah's sister now, so I am your sister too. And Daddy says Sadie can stay with us. We are a family now. It's a terrible thing when the law itself is the bad guy. A man named Caleb found a family and 4 broken children rescued from the clutches of a monster. But the monster had a piece of paper signed by a judge that said those kids were his property. This is a story about how sometimes the truth is not enough. Sometimes You need a whole town to stand up and shout it so loud it can't be ignored. The day of the hearing, his friend Agnes pulled him aside. She told him the man who had hurt those children, a fella named Slade, might just walk free. His lawyer claimed the whole rescue was illegal, that they had overstepped. That sinking feeling hit Caleb right in the gut. Agnes said they had the proof, the pictures, and even 9 fresh graves to show for Slade's cruelty. But Slade's side had a powerful judge who didn't like being proven wrong. It was clear this wasn't just going to be a hearing. It was going to be a fight. Caleb looked over at the children. Noah and Eli were holding each other tight in the snow. Rosie knelt by them with little Sadie tucked safely in her lap. He knew then that this fight was for them, for every single child who had suffered. Agnes squeezed his arm and told him to get some rest, that tomorrow would be the longest day of his life. He gathered his children, all 4 of them, and drove the wagon home under the dark sky. Nobody said a word. The quiet was heavy with all the things they had been through. Back at his cabin, a place that had felt empty and silent for 5 long years, he carried Sadie inside. She was as light as a feather. He watched the boys climb up to the loft, and soon he heard them whispering, 2 brothers catching up on years that had been stolen from them. For the first time since his wife Martha passed, the cabin felt full. It felt alive. He sat at the kitchen table and spoke quietly, as if she were there. "Martha," he said, "I've got 4 kids now." He figured she would laugh at that. He could barely cook for himself, let alone 4 children, but he could feel her warmth, that sense of approval she always had. He knew what he had to do. He checked the locks on the doors and windows, and the new heavy bolt he had installed. Tomorrow he would stand in that courtroom and fight. He would fight a judge's pride and a broken system. He didn't know if he could win, but he knew he wouldn't be alone. The whole town would be there, shoulder to shoulder with him. He had 4 children sleeping upstairs who trusted him. 4 children who finally felt safe. That was worth any fight in the world. The next morning, the courthouse was already overflowing before Caleb and the children even got there. He wore his old Navy suit, the one he'd married Martha in. Rosie had tied the red ribbon he'd bought her into her hair. She looked up at him with so much trust in her eyes. "We're going to win, Daddy," she said. He hoped to God she was right. Noah and Eli walked behind him, standing a little taller now. Sadie held Eli's hand, her big dark eyes taking everything in, quiet and watchful. A child who had learned that a crowd of adults often meant trouble was coming. His friend Clara met them on the steps, her face grim. "The whole town's in there," she said. "But Caleb, Harlan's here. Judge Harlan. The powerful judge from Denver who had signed Slade's guardianship papers 3 years ago. The very man who had given legal protection to Slade's terrible deeds. Harlan was running the hearing himself. Caleb's stomach tightened into a knot. This was worse than he imagined. They walked inside, and a hush fell over the packed room. People made way for them, some reaching out to pat his arm in support. Across the room, Slade sat at a table in his prison clothes, looking smaller and less confident now that the whole world was watching. Caleb's lawyer, an old-timer from Denver named Samuel Graves, was waiting for him. "How bad is it?" Caleb asked him quietly. "Harlan's a problem," Graves said. "He's protecting himself as much as Slade. If he says those papers are legal, it means he never made a mistake. And judges hate admitting they made a mistake." The judge entered, a man with silver hair and a face that said he had never been wrong in his life. His eyes scanned the room and settled on the 4 children for just a moment. Rosie stared right back, her chin held high, that red ribbon a small spot of defiance. "This hearing," Judge Harlan began, his voice like cold steel, "concerns the custody of one Noah Ward." He then turned to the federal marshal. "Marshal, I want to talk about your warrant. I'm questioning your authority to raid Mr. Slade's property." The marshal stood his ground. He explained the warrant was based on testimony of abuse and evidence of forced labor, which is a federal crime. But Harlan didn't care. That's for me to decide, the judge said. And if I find that warrant was improper, everything you found, every photograph, every record, all of it will be thrown out of this court. A gasp went through the room. Just like that, the judge was trying to make the truth disappear just to save his own pride. Every photograph and every scar on every child was now proof. Mr. Graves stood up. Your Honor, if I could have a word. Go on, Mr. Graves. Before we argue about this warrant, I ask the court to hear from the children. Their words are not just evidence, they are human beings with stories to tell. You cannot silence them. Judge Harlan's jaw was tight. I will allow them to speak, but I am still deciding on the physical evidence. Thank you, Your Honor. Graves turned. I call Eli Ward to the stand. Eli stood up, his legs steady and his hands in fists. He walked to the witness stand. He put his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, and his voice did not shake one bit. Graves asked him gently, Eli, how old are you? 13. How long were you at Mr. Slade's mine? 4 years, since I was 9. Tell the judge what it was like there. Eli looked straight at the judge, at the man, not the robe. We worked underground for 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. The smallest children had to go in the narrow tunnels. Some were so tight you crawled on your belly. If a tunnel collapsed, you dug your way out, or you died. Eli's voice was flat. 3 children died that way. If you got hurt, you worked anyway. If you could not work, you did not eat. If you complained, Slade put you in the hole. Describe the hole, Graves said. It is a pit in the ground, 6 feet deep and 4 feet across. They put a grate over the top so the snow and rain fell right on you. No food, no water. I was in there for 3 days once. Why? For asking for water, for dropping a tool, for looking at him the wrong way. Eli's voice turned to iron. Because I was there and he could do it. Did children die at that mine? Yes, sir. I can name them. Thomas was 10. He suffocated in a collapse. Mary was 8. She died of pneumonia because Slade said she was faking sick. James was 12. Slade beat him for stealing food. He died 2 days later. How many little ones in total? 9 that I knew of. Might have been more before my time. An objection was raised, claiming the witness was guessing. But Graves stood firm. Your Honor, this young man lived in that mine for 4 years. He's earned the right to tell what he saw. The judge agreed. Continue. Graves moved closer to Eli. Tell the court about Sadi. That was when the tough shell around Eli started to crack. She was just 6 years old when they dragged her in there, he said, his voice tight. She was so little, she had no idea what was happening. They put her down in the tightest crawl space on her first day. She just screamed for hours. Nobody could reach her. I took care of her. She was the same age as my own brother when we were taken. I failed to protect Noah once. I wasn't about to let the same thing happen to Sadie. Is Sadi here today? Eli pointed across the room. She is right there. The little girl was curled up safe in Rosie's lap. She is 7 now, but she still will not speak to most grown-ups. After Graves finished, Slade's lawyer, Cross, walked up to Eli like he was handling a rattlesnake. He asked, Son, did Mr. Slade not give you a place to sleep and food to eat? Eli looked him square in the eye. He gave us hog slop and a canvas tent in the dead of winter. The lawyer pressed on. But he gave you something. Eli shot back, A jailhouse gives you that too. That does not make it a kindness. Cross then asked if a 13-year-old boy might be stretching the truth out of anger over being punished. Without a word, Eli lifted his shirt. A wave of shock went through the room. His small body was a road map of pure meanness, covered in scars and bruises, old and new. Does this look like punishment to you? He asked quietly. The lawyer turned his back and walked away without another word. Next, Noah walked to the stand, holding his sister Rosie's hand until the very last step. He looked awful small in that big chair, but his gaze was steady. Graves asked the boy, Noah, was your brother telling the truth? Every last word, Noah said. He then looked right at Judge Harlan. Your Honor, you were the one who signed the papers for Mr. Slade to take us. Maybe he pulled the wool over your eyes, too. But now you know what he did. You have seen my brother. You know about the children who did not make it. The room was dead quiet. I am only 9 years old. I cannot make you do a thing, but I am asking you, please do not send us back there. Please do not let a piece of paper be more important than our lives. He added, I am not asking for you to feel sorry for us. I am asking for real justice, the kind that looks after children. The judge's voice was heavy when he said, Thank you, son. You can step down. After him, Agnes laid out the medical facts. She listed the lash marks, the broken bones, the burns, and the starvation found on 17 children. Then it was Caleb's turn. He took the stand and looked out at his family. Graves asked him, Mr. Mackenzie, why did you bring Noah into your house? Caleb said, My little girl asked me to, and because that boy reminded me of all the times I could not help someone before. He woke me up from 5 years of just getting by after my wife passed. Graves then asked what he would do if the court ruled against him. I would fight it, Caleb said, with every appeal I have. And if you run out of appeals, Caleb looked straight at the judge, then I will do what any father would. I will protect my family, even if I have to break the law to do it. Your Honor, I saw boys die in the war for the principle that one man cannot own another. If the law says I have to send these children back to that life, then the law is wrong. Judge Harlan looked thoughtful and called for a 30-minute break. It was the longest half-hour of Caleb's life. All the children gathered around him, a small fortress of hope. Daddy, what if he says no? Rosie whispered. Then we just keep on fighting, Caleb told her. Noah put a hand on his shoulder. No matter what happens, you gave us a family. Nobody can take that from us. Eli agreed, saying, We had this time together. That is more than we ever hoped for. Caleb hugged all 4 of his children close. This right here was real. This was family. No judge could take that away. When they were called back in, Judge Harlan sat down and began to speak. I have heard all the testimony. I have seen the evidence, and I have spent the last half-hour looking at my own part in this. The courtroom fell silent. 3 years ago, the judge said, his voice heavy, Mr. Slade stood before me with a good story and some paperwork. I signed those papers without looking close enough. That failure is on me, and I will live with it forever. I cannot bring back the 9 children who are gone. I cannot give these children back the years they lost. He looked over at Slade. But I can do this. I am declaring every last guardianship paper for Morai Slade to be null and void. They were based on lies and used for criminal acts. Slade jumped up from his chair, but the judge cut him off. You will sit down, Mr. Slade, or you will be gagged. Turning his attention back to the matter at hand, he said, I am granting Caleb Mackenzie's request for permanent custody of Noah Ward. The judge then looked at Caleb. And based on what I have heard today, that custody will also include Eli Ward and the little girl, Sadi. A happy scream from Rosie filled the entire room. She grabbed Noah, who grabbed Eli, and they all tumbled to the floor in a joyful pile of laughter and tears. After things settled down, the judge turned to Slade. As for the federal charges, the warrant stands. The 9 graves on your land will be investigated. You are going to answer for what you have done. Slade, looking defeated, said, I want an appeal. The judge nodded. That is your right, but you will do it from a jail cell. Marshal, get this man out of my sight. The deputies led Slade away in chains, his confidence all gone. As they passed Caleb's table, Slade stopped and stared at Noah. You destroyed me, he hissed. Noah looked right back at him. No, sir, the boy said, his voice calm. You did that to yourself. I only told people what was true. After they took Slade away, the whole room erupted in cheers and tears. Friends and neighbors rushed to congratulate Caleb and his new family. In the middle of it all, Caleb held his children and felt 5 long years of grief finally wash away. It was over. They walked out of that courthouse and into the bright sunshine. For the first time in a long time, the snow on the ground seemed to sparkle, and folks lined the steps just to shake Caleb's hand and welcome the children home. The wagon ride back was a happy noise that never seemed to stop. Rosie chattered the whole way, making plans for Christmas and telling Sadie all about the friendliest chicken and which horse loved having its mane braided. Eli and Noah sat shoulder to shoulder, quiet but together at last. The whole trip, Sadie, sitting on Rosie's lap, said only a single word. Home. That's right, Rosie told her. Home. Just as the sun started to dip behind the mountains, the cabin came into view. Caleb stopped the wagon and just stared for a moment. It was the same cabin he had built with his own 2 hands, but it looked different. It looked bigger and brighter, like the old place had been waiting all this time for enough people to finally fill it up. "All right, everybody out," Caleb called. "Those chores are not going to do themselves." They all scattered, with Rosie taking Sadie to meet the chickens and Noah heading off to feed the horses. Eli just stood in the yard, turning in a slow circle, trying to take it all in. Eli. "Yeah, welcome home, son." "I do not know how to do this," Eli admitted quietly. "A normal life, a family. I do not know how it is supposed to work," Caleb chuckled. "Neither do I, son. My biscuits are awful. We will figure it all out together. What if I make a mess of things?" "You will," Caleb said. "So will I. That is just how families are. It is never simple, but it is always worth it." Eli looked at the cabin, at Rosie and Sadie by the fence, and at Noah pumping water with arms that grew stronger each day. "Caleb, that little girl is going to need a lot of help. She does not sleep through the night. She screams from bad dreams." "Then we will be quiet," Caleb said simply. "She is scared of the dark. We will leave a lamp burning for her. She might never be like other kids." "Who is?" Caleb put a hand on Eli's shoulder. "She's got 4 people who love her now. That is a fine start. The rest we will handle as it comes." Just then, the old hound dog, Biscuit, came over and sat at Eli's feet, thumping his tail once on the cold ground. That night, Caleb cooked for 5 people, burned the biscuits, and filled the cabin with smoke. Rosie declared that her daddy's cooking was a true disaster. And then Noah laughed. A real, honest-to-goodness laugh. The sound was so rare and beautiful that it made Eli's heart ache, because he had not heard it in 4 long years. Sadie, in her own quiet way, ate a whole plate of food. When she finished, she gently pushed her plate forward and whispered something to Eli. He leaned in close. "She wants to know if there is more." "There is always more," Caleb promised her. "Every single night for the rest of your life." After supper, they sat by the fire while Rosie read from a book about horses. Eli and Noah played a quiet game of checkers. Sadie sat on the floor, gently stroking Biscuit's head as he rested in her lap. The old dog stayed perfectly still, as if he knew this quiet little girl needed his steady presence. Caleb washed the dishes, listening to the gentle sounds of his new family, the sound of a page turning, the clicking of bottle caps on wood, and the happy, peaceful breathing of his children. The sounds of life filled the cabin, a welcome noise after so many quiet years. This was what Martha would have wanted, not the hollow silence he had lived with. He stepped out onto the porch, into the sharp, cold air. Above, the Colorado sky was filled with a million glittering stars. Behind him, the door creaked open. It was Noah, then Eli, and finally Rosie, with little Sadie propped on her hip. "We are all coming out to see the stars," Rosie declared. They laid out blankets on the cold wood and huddled together. Eli held Sadie close, who just stared up with her mouth agape, seeing a clear night sky for the first time in 8 long months. In the quiet dark, Noah asked, "Caleb, you reckon Mama can see us from up there?" Caleb thought of Martha, of the 5 lonely years he had spent talking to her right on this porch, with only the stars for company. "Yeah, son," he said quietly. "I reckon she can." Eli asked what she might say. "She would probably say it took me long enough." A soft laugh came from Eli. Then it was Eli's voice again, serious this time. Caleb, thank you for coming for us, for not walking away. You do not need to thank me. Yes, I do, Eli insisted. For 4 years, nobody came. Nobody even looked our way. Then you showed up. You, a 7-year-old girl and a rifle. And everything was different. Caleb shook his head. Rosie changed everything. I just handled the wagon. From beside him, Rosie mumbled, sleepy-like. You saved them, Daddy. He whispered back. They saved me, too. Soon they were all asleep, one after the other. Eli was the last to give in, fighting to stay on watch like he always did. Caleb just lay there, listening to them breathe. 4 kids the world had tried to forget. These children had found their way to him, and together they had decided they were worth a damn. He thought about all the folks he had lost and could not save. Then he remembered Rosie's question in that snowy town square, the one that cracked his whole world open and put it back together right. Daddy, can we take him home? The answer was always going to be yes. He closed his eyes. In that little cabin, in the winter of 1887, a family that should not have been but was, slept safe and sound. A family built on nothing more than pure grit and a whole lot of love. And that was more than enough.